Living Wax Museum. This is something I did last year, and I'm sort of midstream right now in doing it again. But what we do, well, if you're a 5th, 6th grade teacher, you know, especially in 6th grade, the content switches very heavily toward reading for information, nonfiction material. And so I wanted to incorporate that in a way that would be interesting to my students, but I wanted them, I'm a big touch it, feel it, smell it, breathe it kind of person. You may come in my classroom and I may be sitting on the floor with my kids, even though they're 6th graders. I've actually had that happen to me before, and administrators walk in and they think I've lost my mind, but I want my kids to remember what we do, and I try to connect emotions and things to it so that it's memorable. But one of the things that I started doing in my classroom last year was have a living wax museum so that our children could learn about people that have an impact on our world, a lot of famous people. And of course they, you know, a lot of them knew who Michael Jordan was and people like that, but when I would hear our school secretary in the morning make our announcements, and she would do our daily words of wisdom, which would include quotes from famous people like Maya Angelou, the kids would look around the room and they would have no connection to that at all, and they would be like, who's that? So I sat down a couple years ago in the summer and made a list of people that I felt like they needed to know who they were, like Steve Jobs and Pocahontas. And I made this list, and what we do is the kids don't get to choose who they pick. So the day that they draw their names, that's a really big deal. They draw, I have a boy bucket and a girl bucket of names, and they draw their name, and it's funny, they'll draw the name and go, what's a bird?
10 seconds or so start picking up.
Or who is, well actually this happened a couple weeks ago, a little boy drew it out and he said,
like it is right now.
Colonel Harlan Sanders. Who is that? And now he's like, oh, it's Colonel Sanders, now I know who he is. But what the children do is they are required to research their person, and they actually become that person in the Living Wax Museum. And I try to incorporate a lot of other subjects. I work with the writing teacher because they write a piece about their person. I work with the art teacher, and then we try to incorporate some social studies as well. They have to do a map of where their person is from or where their person grew up. They have to do design a postage stamp in art that represents their person. So they have to do a lot of research, and if you'll notice on the board I have some sample pieces of some of the sheets that they had, the information sheets that they had to fill out, and they have to have a minimum number of sources. They learned very quickly that all sources are not reliable because they started looking at dates and marriages, and they were not consistent from one side to another. So they learned that they really had to check and find that information and make sure that it was accurate. So that was a really good experience for them. They have to write a speech from first person point of view, so it gives me an opportunity to talk about that. And they become that person, essentially, is what they do. Our costumes, they look really great and elaborate on this poster, but it might surprise you if I told you that most of our costumes come from Goodwill and their grandparents' closets and their mother's closets, because I have a meeting with every parent before we get started to let them know that I don't expect anybody to go out and buy this big, elaborate, expensive costume. I want it to be very cheap, and I want them to be frugal, and I want them to be creative, because the costume is not the point. And it's amazing what they come up with. They share, they borrow, they trade, and it ends up being amazing. But the first thing, and I forgot to tell you this, I do give a pre-test at the beginning of the unit to see what they know about these people in history. And then at the end I plan to give a post-test to see how much their knowledge has increased. And I can already tell you, I know what the results are going to be, because a couple weeks ago when they got their names, they were like, well, who in the world is that? And now they're arguing whose person is better. Well, my person did this, or well, did you know that Albert Einstein had dyslexia? And it's so neat to hear them be so excited about somebody that has impacted their world, and they're learning how that person has changed society. You know, Steve Jobs, Tim Berners-Lee, all of these characters, and they are flourishing, and it's exciting for me as a teacher to see them be excited about what they're learning. The day of the actual museum, we're actually almost ready. We'll be doing it in a couple weeks. And what the children will do is their speech that they will have memorized by next week. They will stand frozen, and they'll have their background scenery that they will paint in art class as well behind them, and that will have something to do with their person. For example, if they are Laura Ingalls Wilder, they may have a covered wagon painted behind them, or a house on a prairie or something. So they'll have that behind them, and what they will do is they'll have a little paper button on the floor. The entire school will go through. We open it up to outside visitors. We'll have parents and grandparents and neighbors and all kinds of people. They feel like stars. It's like paparazzi because there's so many people. Actually, when we did it last year, we did one performance, and this year we're going to do 3 because I expect us to have at least 1,000 visitors this year. But what the students do and the visitors do is they touch the button that says press me, and it's a paper button. It doesn't really work. But the kids know that they become unfrozen, and they give their 60-second speech telling who they are, and then they move on to the next person. And so all of this is going on at the same time, and so it just really comes to life. They have their little booth space, and they are so excited they can hardly stand it. Every day I have at least 10 kids say, do we know the exact date yet? Because we're waiting on a gymnasium renovation to complete to make sure we're on schedule. So they are really, really excited, and I'm excited to be able to tell you when I come back in the spring exactly how much they have learned.
It dropped again. It was perfect.
You're actually, if you'd like to come, we do have an evening performance, so I'd love to have you if you look close enough. Come and visit our museum. We're excited. Do you have any questions?